Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining us today as we discuss the topic of preparing your dental practice for a cyber attack. This presentation is brought to you by Adams Brown Technology Specialists. To give you a little bit of a background, my name is Shane Yance. I'm the Chief Experience Officer here with Adams Brown, and I've been in the technology world dating all the way back really to middle school. And I've been seeing the evolution of computers and how they have transformed the way we conduct business and provide for our various areas of expertise in the industry, and specifically in the dental industry. I've watched the transformation of chairside digital from clear back in the early 2000s when there weren't computers next to dental chairs, now to where they're in pretty much every corner of a dental office. And I've also, unfortunately, over the years, seen some of the damage that can be done by cyber criminals, as as the data information is finding its way into the wrong hands. And so today, my aim is to share a brief overview of the cybersecurity landscape, and also a little bit of a discussion of different ways to safeguard your practice as these threats continue to evolve. Now, over the past 30 years in this industry, I've seen a lot of things, but nothing quite as damaging as what is occurring, really recently in these days. Just an example of that is here just recently I was reading an article that's according to a Dentist Advantage website. It's a website I look at for different articles and things. They were talking about an estimated 432 dental practices were potentially affected by uh, a ransomware attack that occurred. And I think it's important to note here that this attack was carried out by a third party vendor solution. So, and that was a chain reaction that then carried down into the various dental offices they served. And so I bring that up because sometimes you may not think you're not big enough for large enough of an organization to be a target, but unfortunately, as an aggregate whole, if a vendor that's servicing several accounts is attacked, that can then filter down into your environment and become a problem that you now have to deal with. So, our goal in that is to, or any other company or your IT provider needs to be in a position to help protect you and safeguard you from those types of situations. So just something to think about as we kind of get into this. So just to kind of start off, I'll outline some of the risks and things to think about as we're getting into this, and I'll lead with you know uh, a phishing attack. And a phishing attack defined as something where someone is attempting to get masses of people through email usually. Similar examples are like PayPal prompting a victim to enter uh, password changes or information to help gain access to the account, which would then ultimately lead to leaking uh, password information, or ways to get access to the account to get money and things like that out of the accounts. And then there's more focused attacks like spear phishing, where again those are more specific and targeted attacks, and we're seeing an uptick in this. And this is where somebody in your organization that maybe would be normally in a senior role like a CEO impersonation email asking for let's say the CFO to wire money to a specific account or to a vendor, or update financial and banking information when it really isn't where it's supposed to be coming from. And so these are what spoofed emails are like this, and that's where you see the spear phishing. And then of course something I'm sure you've certainly heard the word by now, ransomware, which has been going on for several years now, where your files get locked or encrypted by the bad actor, and then that makes it where you can't access that information inside your office. And then those guys are asking for ransom to be paid in order for you to see those files again. And that has now gotten to be a little more complicated and uh, incrementally and exponentially worse with now with higher speed internet data exfiltration, where the actual information is taken away out of the environment and then also held that for ransom in such a way that if the person doesn't pay the ransom, or the victim doesn't pay the ransom, the information would be then leaked into the dark web and out into the public view, which then leads to several other remediation requirements and very complex situation, usually involving financial penalties and fines that are to be paid as far as that goes. And then you start looking at other things like unauthorized access, where people even sometimes within the office are getting access to certain pieces of information that aren't things they should have access to. And that usually boils down to just relaxed logins or avoiding adding security or permission access within the systems to make things easier for folks to work throughout the office, while at the same time, you know, exposing or potentially exposing that same uh, business to a potential leak of information. And when you talk about the value of patient data, you know, these pieces of information contain individually personally identifiable information. So that basically means that this is stuff where they have access to impersonate you or take that information, whether that's a birth date, name, social security number, other types of information that relates to your health, or other information in general that can be used to do all kinds of terrible things. And that's what makes, specifically medical, a very big target right now, and even more so, we'd say, than in financial markets, because there's so much more information that's put together about individuals than you even see, let's say, in a financial environment. And when you start talking about fines that can start from $100 to 50,000 per violation, the cost can add up very, very quickly when you start thinking of it in terms of that. So, and when we talk about violations, we're talking about things that relate to compliance, and I know many of you should be familiar with HIPAA compliance, PCI compliance, uh, and quite specifically as it relates to HIPAA, what we see are the top common HIPAA violations are having poor access controls in place, where when it relates to multi-factor authentication, uh, you know access, physical security, having files, or the actual server equipment maybe in a location that's poses a risk to being taken, or that information be available. Certainly, again, as I mentioned, the device theft itself, laptops, mobile devices, places where stuff might be stored and valuable information maybe that should uh, shouldn't be, but it is, or it has to be in those environments, but is then lost or stolen. Of not going through the process of encrypting or securing the data as per the guidelines and the compliance requirements that are set forth. Uh, Inadvertent, improper disposal of private health information. That could be simply just getting rid of a copier that has stored faxes or copies in the memory of the copier that gets taken away and is now out of the environment, but yet the access to that data is now available. Or old computers that maybe have data stored on them that weren't properly disposed of and certified. And then, of course, uh, internally, impermissible disclosure of the data that through employee misconduct, or just quite simply faxing something with PHI information to a wrong location, or an email, things like that. Another one that's not as that we see out there, that's just not thought of as often, but is very important, is not having a business associates agreement in place with your vendors that service your account. That's one that sometimes gets overlooked, in the process of bringing on new relationships and things. You can sometimes overlook that document, and that's a very important piece of the puzzle when you talk about protecting covered entities like your dental practices. And then just simply lack of employee training, which is really a very, very important thing to consider when you're looking at helping your your team uh, safeguard themselves from inadvertent disclosure of information that's private. So and that's really what, as we kind of get into that, that's really what we're talking about here. It's really everyone's responsibility, to address this stuff, and you got to look at your employees and yourself as the first line of defense, kind of like we talked about earlier, getting that training. And when you see how employees are handling these vast amounts of confidential data on a daily basis, it's just they need to understand that role that they have, and that means adhering to all of these data protection policies and protocols and file sharing practices, encrypting emails, how data is handled, and so forth. And so it's just so important, really, to institute a regular cybersecurity training block into your environments, because this is where you have the opportunity to give your staff and arm them with the latest information about what's happening out there and how to protect themselves from some of those things. And uh, as we've just talked about a little bit, typically suspicious activities revolve around email clicks that trigger or lead to something else that's happening in the background. And usually that comes from creating unintended remote access or malicious activity that happens behind the scenes that you weren't aware of. And certainly uh, goes right along with that. We also suggest and consider watching out for what are social engineering scams as well that are carried out over the phone. And we've seen scenarios like this, and that where uh, maybe you wouldn't click the email when you just got the email by itself, but if you had somebody calling in that was somehow making you feel safer about clicking that email, that's where social engineering comes in. We've seen stuff like that happen, where an email is sent in conjunction with a phone call where there's some sort of a personal trust built up in the conversation to get someone to open the email, and then once they've clicked it inside that link, then what's happened is too late to back out on, and then that's where the problem happens at that point. So so really, what we have to do at that point, and what you have to think about, is how to protect and create and put in place technical measures to help safeguard your practice and your business. And some of these items I'll share here with you are really where all of this happens. So we'll just get right into it with antivirus software. It kind of goes without saying, you've heard it, I'm sure, many times, but it does sometimes. We walk into businesses where it's overlooked, and a lot of times it's not just enough just to have the basic or the free antivirus software, the one that comes built into the Windows systems or the computer. You really need to look at next generation software that has behavioral analysis, has some AI, some automation built in, things like that. And you have to start thinking in terms of layering, just like just like protecting a house. You may have a lock at the front door, you may have an alarm system, you may have a dog, you may have firearms packed away. These are all layers for protecting your home. Same thing with security in your office, and that really starts at the top with your firewall, which is what is the very first automatic line of defense in your practice. It's at the top, and that's where your internet comes into the building. And typically that's going to be more automated. That's going to be something that, when properly configured by your trusted IT provider, will handle and filter a lot of the what we refer to as the low hanging fruit when it comes to cybersecurity. Things that are just automated, things that are happening out there. Usually the attackers are out there just scanning for openings and ways to get in. The firewall kind of handles a lot of that sort of stuff. And then of course, then the email security is where a lot of magic happens as well, in trying to contain and filter some of the stuff that might be coming in, and helping keep the bad guys out of your inbox. as much as possible, and try to help minimize the number of emails that have clickable links that are heading in the wrong direction. So, uh, and that kind of ties into, again, extra layers of security that you get in place. And then, of course, always as a last line of defense, your backups. And while that is important from a standpoint of making sure that you have uh, the capacity to put your practice back together if, in fact, the files get encrypted or locked up, or really for any type of disaster that could strike beyond even a cyber attack. But most importantly, just helping to give your practice and you the peace of mind that you have a way to restore access to the information to continue communicating with your patients. And so, and along with that, of course, making sure that those backups are being validated and are reliable, and that's a part of the responsibility of the IT provider that you work with. And so those are all kind of key points there. And then certainly securing your patient management systems, whatever main software that you use, making sure that you have password protection and the area permissions are set up so that you're not uh, allowing wide open access to anybody that can gain access to the desktop of your computer. Uh, that helps create additional safeguards there. And certainly, whenever possible, instituting a multi-factor authentication policy in your environment, which basically means you have something beyond just username and password. You have maybe an app on your phone that has constantly changing numbers, or a key fob that has this, some way that that accessing the system requires your involvement in order to get onto those systems. And that just adds an additional layer to that. And so those are just some things to think about there. And then further to that, we talk about planning and response for an incident. Again, we've talked about it a little bit, but the HIPAA breach notification rules state that a cyber attack involving exposure of patient records requires the affected patients to be notified, which in many cases, a cyber attack that involves ransomware and extortion of data, exfiltration of data, usually means all of your patients. So that's something that to be mindful of. And again, that can be pretty financially destructive when you talk about fines that can range anywhere from, again, $100 to $50,000 per violation, which of course is why it's important for businesses to make sure that they have a cyber liability insurance policy in place to aid in the case that a breach notification becomes necessary. And so when you start talking about building out a plan, what we're really looking at here for an incident response plan is preparation. And like we talked about on the previous slide, getting the tools installed to prevent something from happening in the first place, but still planning anyway, because just as much as IT systems are being put in place to safeguard these things, the bad actors are out there coming up with ways to circumvent those systems. So it's been said that the bad guys only have to be right once and the good guys only have to be wrong once, so for something to happen. So it's still important to get a plan in place, which really involves documentation and understanding the roles that of different people in the case of a breach that occurs. Like, who are we going to contact? Who's going to be involved in various aspects of the response and remediation? Generally a communications person, whether that's, someone on your team that can work with the IT team on understanding what happened. Typically, contacting the authorities, who's going to be called, and certainly the your attorney on record, and those kind of things to help work with, and sometimes a PR firm or somebody that you would work with that would help with the notification process, and certainly your cyber liability insurance provider. So these are all, you know, various contacts that we would want to look at, having preparation and being ready to know how to work through that process. Then certainly the step of preparation there is detecting and analyzing. So always have systems in place and being vigilant to monitor for, and that's typically a part of your process with your IT providers, but it also is for each of your staff and yourself on your equipment to be on the lookout for any strange behavior on the computer, like icons in different places, new icons on the desktop that weren't there yesterday, you know, a mouse moving on the screen when you weren't aware of a remote access with your support folks, things like that. These are all things that are important to watch out for. So you have some automation and you have some human, aspects to the detection and analyzation of what's going on. So, and then of course, in the event of something, we're talking about containing, eradicating, and recovering. So if in fact something does happen as a part of the plan, what's going to happen, taking things offline, following the procedures that are necessary to get those communications going as related to your incident response plan. And then very, very important too is the post-incident improvement. So that's going back and looking at what happened, what could have been done differently, what can be done to help mitigate or shore up those gaps in the security environment to look at ways to prevent this from happening and occurring again. And so again, just as we talk about, this is kind of where the regulatory and legal readiness is in here. And we this again, it's just so important, I guess, to really drill this point home that you know uh, you got to have an incident response plan in place, because when something does happen, you want to have some control, because there's going to be a lot of anxiety with a lot of people. What happened? What's going on? What are we gonna? What do we know? What do we need to know? And who do we need to tell? And so when you have some of that stuff in place, it gives you uh, a good you know guidance plan and strategy to get those processes in place. And really, what we're talking about here, you know, uh, the ideas on all of this, there's these outcomes from these attacks can be very, very damaging to any business. And the goal is to do everything we can and everything that you can to help protect yourself from that situation. So kind of with that, when you think about it, the cost of it, really investing in appropriate cybersecurity tools and procedures kind of pales in comparison to the cost of really a fully executed attack should it occur. So you know, there's a lot of moving parts in an attack, an attack. And again, remembering what I mentioned earlier, you're going to involve a lot of people, and you got to consider the possibility that data may also be outside of your network and no longer in your control and subject to public exposure. And that's where really the protection systems need to be in place to be prepared for that. And also just understanding too that in the case of an attack, the equipment a lot of times ends up being uh, involved in an investigation of forensics. Usually the authorities are, when they involve those folks for insurance and beyond, investigations occur. That usually means they want to have all of the equipment kept the way it was when the attack occurred. So if the goal is to get back up and running, a lot of times one of the additional expenses that sometimes isn't realized is buying all new equipment so that the existing equipment can be handed over for that investigation process. So kind of tie up your equipment. So that's a lot of times where it's slow getting things back. Even if you have a great backup system in place, it's got to go usually back onto new hardware. So it takes rebuilding an environment still in that kind of a case. And then you have all of the collaboration that has to occur within all of these resources to put everything back on, back online together. So it's really way I guess one way I'd like to say and look at it, when you're talking about the security, it's a lot like insurance. A premium is paid with the goal that nothing happens. You know, a good day at the office is nothing happening, and you're paying for all these systems and tools to be in place. And I think sometimes it's easy for people to take, you know, nothing for granted and not realize that what they're investing in, and these tools are put in place to help keep you know, work days relatively uneventful, uh, from you know, looking at it as a cost center rather than a really an environment for savings. I mean, I know it may seem like a zero sum game, but in the end, having a continuous continuity in your workflow and your business day is a pretty important thing these days, and it's probably one of the best things that could happen to a business. So just taking a few of those extra steps to invest in regular security audits, uh, penetration testing, working with a team of technology experts that you can trust and work with, implementing these systems and procedures, and just stay ahead in this kind of this dangerous world data world right now. You can put your business practice in really the best possible place to stay out of the news and stay out of your patients' mail emails and mailboxes with breach notifications. So that's you know, pretty much where we're at with that. And so I like to take a minute here and, you know, thank you guys for joining me for this brief overview and opportunity to raise your awareness on this and on the current cybersecurity landscape. I also hope you're able to take something from this and be able to go back and implement something immediately in your practice in an effort to improve, you know, the safety and security of your environment. So if you have any thoughts or concerns, would like to discuss anything I've shared today, please feel free to reach out, as I have my email posted above here, and I would be happy to connect with you and discuss further. So again, I appreciate your time today, and thank you very much. And thank you for listening.